All right, so we're at cluster C now in this very interesting lecture. And just another quick little quiz, okay? So cluster A is characterized by what two words? Odd and eccentric, right? And cluster B, and that was erratic and dramatic. And do you remember what cluster C is characterized by? What kind of behaviors and thought processes? And the answer to that is anxious and fearful. And we're going to start here with avoidant personality disorder. There's a real sense of social inhibition here. So people who have avoidant personality disorder are very, very uncomfortable around others. And you know that so far this sounds a lot like schizotypal, right? That they're very nervous around other people. But keep listening. People with avoidant personality disorder are really afraid of being judged negatively. So when they're around other people, they're really nervous. They're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing, they're looking the wrong way, that they're going to behave the wrong way. There's really this intense fear. And what happens is there's all this sympathetic nervous system activity. And it becomes more and more apparent to the other people that they're around. So imagine how that would make you feel. You're nervous enough to begin with, but then you become aware that you are sweating so profusely that everybody knows. Everybody notices it. And you are shaking, trembling so dramatically that people can see it. Right? And imagine how that would add to your anxiety. So it's this huge feedback loop. And that's where the avoidance comes in. They want to try to avoid social situations, not because they don't want friends and they don't want the company of other people, okay? But because of this intense fear of being judged negatively. And you know what is really, really sad is when this fear of negative evaluation is so strong that they actually avoid working jobs. Because imagine how difficult, if they are working, how difficult that annual review is. Just even being around other people. But think about the annual work review. I mean, there's always going to be criticism there. And they have an intense fear of criticism. And it doesn't matter if they're the very best person on their job. They are going to be a wreck in that job evaluation meeting. Okay, so it's really sad when it gets to the point where they might even not work. They'll avoid having a job because of this discomfort and avoid having a relationship with another person. So in extreme cases, they can be living at home at an age that's much older than what is healthy, when they should be out and enjoying the relationship that they could have with another person and that quality of a more fulfilling life. But there's an intense fear of criticism. And there's a huge inferiority complex with avoidant personality disorder. So they really feel inadequate. And like I said, if they're working, they can be the very best person in their job and they will never know it because they really feel that they are inadequate, inferior to others. They're certainly going to be reluctant to try anything new. If you didn't have any confidence in yourself, you wouldn't either. But don't get this mixed up with schizotypal, even though we've got that social isolation and we've got that anxiety in social situations. Remember that schizotypal has those mild schizophrenia symptoms, so that odd part is very different, is going to keep these detangled for you, can really help to do that. And don't get it mixed up with schizoid. Remember that schizoid also have experienced a lot of social isolation, but they want it that way. And they don't have an intense fear of criticism. They don't even react to criticism or praise, right? So keep those untangled in your mind. Now, Dependent personality disorder is characterized by in a really excessive over-reliance on others, on other people to make decisions for them, a real lack of self-confidence, and a real need for other people to make decisions for them. So they don't trust themselves at all to make a decision. Now, it is not uncommon for us to want to discuss important decisions with people to whom we are close. So it wouldn't be uncommon for you to want to discuss different options for what you're going to major in college with your parents before making a decision. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to go along with what they advise you, but you really want to take that into consideration. But we're talking about something very different here. Not only with dependent personality disorder, are we talking really minor decisions like what to wear that day, for instance. Super minor decisions, but having other people simply make them for them, not just taking their opinion into consideration. And imagine, if it were minor things like that, how often they would need this other person or persons in their life. Okay, they're constantly going to be bugging them when that person is trying to work or whatever, because you run into these little decisions all day long. Okay, and they truly do not trust themselves to make a decision, to make the right decision. Okay, they also have a fear of separation. Obviously, if they found somebody who is letting them rely on them to this degree, it's going to be really scary, the idea of letting that person go. So they have a great need to be taken care of, and they're very unhappy if they're alone. And if they're in a relationship, oftentimes they will ignore their own needs if that's what is needed to protect and prolong that relationship, even if the relationship happens to be abusive. Hey, now if that relationship ends, how do you think that happened? You might have guessed it's much more likely to be on the part of the other person, right, who ends it. But in that case, what we tend to see is that they very frantically and quickly seek another person to replace that person. Okay. So they're really afraid that they will make the wrong decision. They don't trust any decision that they would make on their own. They want others to make them all for them. Okay. Now, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. A lot of you are familiar already with OCD, so you might be familiar with that. That is a clinical disorder, by the way, and it's much more extreme than obsessive compulsive personality disorder. In fact, for instance, OCPD, the personality disorder, does not include things like hand washing or fear of contamination. What we see with OCPD, the personality disorder, is a preoccupation with order and with rules and with perfection, a great need for perfection, and a very great need for control. Okay? To the point, this need for perfection to the point where oftentimes they can't finish a project. I mean, think about it. If you really are trying to achieve perfection, you're never going to achieve perfection, right? You're never going to be happy with something and consider it to be done and finished. You're going to keep wanting to try to redo it and get it closer and closer to perfection. People with OCPD tend to be very work-oriented, and they work very hard. They try very hard to get things perfect, and so they can do well at work, except for a couple of things, right? Their supervisor's probably really going to have to prompt them to finish something, right? To let go of that perfection need and just consider it finished, good enough, move on. They also have some difficulty with time management skills because you know, it's a decision. And what if they allocate it incorrectly? Okay, what if they allocate their time incorrectly? So there can be a real problem with making big decisions, not those little ones like avoidant personality disorder, but we're talking big ones now. There can be a real problem there. And it's not like they turned to other people to make them for them. Other people could make the wrong one too, but there's just that need for perfection. What if they get it wrong? So they can go over and over the pros and the cons of something and never reach a decision on it. Okay. So I said that they can be really good at their work though, because they certainly try really hard and they're very focused and they follow the rules, right? And I'll tell you something, that's something interesting about narcissists. Narcissists tend to be, more so than others, very successful in business. Unfortunately, they oftentimes are the owner of a business. And I say unfortunately, you know, the corporate world is kind of a dog-eat-dog world, so a narcissist, by taking advantage of others, oftentimes can really get ahead. And I say unfortunately because they really can do some harm sometimes to the workers without, you know, any feeling of empathy for them with a real sense of entitlement. Okay, but back to OCPD, very interesting personality disorder. They can be very stubborn. So control freaks, they really want to do things their own way. So they have a way of doing things. They kind of get into that ridge, okay, and they want to keep doing things that way. Very much control freaks and very rigid in their thinking, kind of not unusual for them to be overly formal, and especially inflexible in their thinking when it comes to moral issues. So however they happen to feel about a moral issue, if you try to get them to see a different viewpoint, unlikely. So they tend to be very inflexible with their thinking. And they also tend to be extremely frugal. Okay? They have difficulty throwing things away no matter how worn those things might be. And this, a lot of people know that, are familiar with this show on television. What's it called? Hoarders. Okay? And you know that there's, if you watch that show a lot, you know that there's a connection with OCD, the clinical disorder, not OCPD necessarily. So OCD. And do know that most people that are OCD are not messy hoarders like what you see on TV. Okay, but most people are OCD or OCPD are hoarders in a much more organized fashion. So it's not unusual, for instance, for someone with OCPD to have a two-stall garage but nowhere to put their car, because the garage is completely filled with very neatly stacked boxes that are all organized and labeled excessively. Hey, so that preoccupation with order, right? And you combine that with this extreme frugality.